Now let's take some of the elements we've been working with and turn it into a small interactive piece. You'll see that I've already added a number of layers in my new file. I've got a layer at the top called Actions, beneath that a layer called Labels, beneath that a layer called Nav, short for navigation, and 3 layers that go with the 3 pieces of content we're going to use in this example. If I look immediately below this, we see the gray bar that goes with our stage area. And at the left-hand side of that, we see a tab where we can move back and forth between our previous file we've been working on and the new file that's just been created. One of the features of Flash is that we can borrow content that's been built previously in other files. Inside my file first interface, as long as test1, our previous file, is open, we can come up here to our pull-down menu and find the library that went with test1. And if we go to that, we can borrow or place content out of the library from test1 into our new file first interface. Once there, we can find that it's now also been placed inside the library that goes with first interface. I'm going to keep things tidy and take my new button and drag it inside my button folder. Make note that I've tried to organize my file here so that my images that will be used for my content and the buttons that I'm going to be used for navigating are all organized into folders. Next, I'm going to add some blocks of time here in my timeline. I'm going to place my cursor at the bottom of frame 10 and hold down the Shift key and click all the way up to the top. Once I've done that, I'm going to right click and insert blank keyframes. By doing this, I've added a frame span that goes from frame 1 to frame 9 for all of my layers. I'm going to do this again several times so that I can lay out a sort of matrix to handle all the content that's going to be in my interface. I'm going to move out to frame 20, hold down Shift and click at the top, insert blank keyframe, move out to frame 30, hold down Shift, click at the top, insert blank keyframe, and now I've got 3 blocks of time that can be used like a spreadsheet matrix. Next, I'm going to bring out the content that I want to place in each of my zones. I have 3 zones, one for the Ole Hansen pool, one for a lifeguard tower, and my start image, which is going to be my main page. I'm going to move my playback head over to frame 10 and open up my library of JPEGs. Inside here, I'm going to place on the lifeguard layer the lifeguard JPEG. Let's go ahead and drag that out onto the stage. We can drag that and sort of approximate where it needs to go. We can also use the nudge keys to move this piece into place. Let's go ahead and move our playback head now over to frame 20 and select the Ole Hansen layer I've just called Ole here and find the Ole Hansen image and now drag that out into the stage. And we can also place this carefully by hand, and we can also use the nudge keys to kind of move it around and get it just where we want. You'll notice the images in all 3 cases only fill the frame span where the playback head is active, and they're only going to land on the layer that's active. If the playback head happened to have been over here when I dragged in Ole Hansen, then it would have been placed right above my lifeguard tower, but on a different layer. And that's not what we wanted. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that. Next, I'm going to remove some of the frames that I've added here for navigation. I'm going to have 3 buttons that allow me to move back and forth between these 3 zones. And I really don't want to have to place these buttons new each time. So I'm going to go ahead and select the frame spans that go from frame 10 all the way out to 30 and highlight those, and then I'm going to right click and remove frames. Once I do that, these subdivisions no longer exist here. What I do need to do is extend this length of time all the way out to the end, and I'm going to select the last frame handle here and drag it all the way out to the end of my composition, time composition, and you'll see now this frame span extends from frame 1 all the way out to frame 30. When this plays, this will be the end of content, and you'll see these are all new blank keyframes here. So if the playback head made it to this area, we'd see nothing. So wherever the time is post-shade in gray, we have content. If there's a time or frame span that's white or empty, there's no content. You can see now that I've dragged 3 buttons from my library out onto the stage. I've placed them inside the navs layer, And since I have one frame span that lasts from frame 1 all the way to frame 29, the buttons will always be there, regardless of what the background is. Of course, it's important that this layer is above the content layers so that the buttons are always visible and not covered up by some piece of content. This is as obvious as using anything in Photoshop, but if I just simply would drag this layer down inside the stack, we'll notice that if we scrub over now into these other zones where Lifeguard and Oli are above the buttons, they disappear and we can no longer gain access to them. Next, I want to give each one of these buttons a unique name. This is its address. It makes it possible for ActionScript to communicate between the button, the timeline, and other features of the interface. You'll notice in the Property Inspector at the top there's a place to put an instance name. The name that this has as a symbol in the library is OneName. It's completely unrelated to the name we give it out in our scene. So for my first one, I'm going to call that start_btn. And as a general rule, this will not work. Names will not work with any special characters except, say, the underscore. I'm going to give the next button the name of Lifeguard_btn. And the last button we're going to give the name Ole_btn. Next, we're going to give names to addresses in the timeline that with the playback head can be sent to so we can view the various pieces of content. With the playback head all the way over in frame 1, I'm going to come down to my labels layer, select the first frame, and you'll see that frames also can be given a unique name. I'm going to give this first frame the name Start. Now I'm going to grab my playback head and drag it over in the timeline to frame 10. At frame 10, I'm going to select the frame inside the labels layer that I want to use for my next marker, and I'm going to just simply call that Life. And let's go ahead and move our playback head over to frame 20, highlight that frame, and I'm going to give it the name Ole Pool. And if we slide this over, we'll see now that there is a red flag and a label that goes with each one of these locations in the timeline. Okay, so we have some buttons, and we have 3 backgrounds, and we have 3 distinct locations in our timeline. But if we should test this right now, there's nothing to cause the playback head to stop, and any movie in Flash will loop indefinitely unless controlled. We can see that just by going to Control, Test Movie, and Test in Flash Professional. You'll see it's going to just scroll through here like a slideshow. So we need to introduce some scripts to cause the playback head to stop in strategic locations so that we can view the content in each of these zones.